Jess Walter is one of my favorite living authors. The humor, the pathos, the intelligence. It's been a thrill and a pleasure to have my career sort of run concurrent path as Jess's over the past couple decades and to be able to close down some bars with him and have a relationship. And I'm proud to call him a friend. I've enjoyed many cocktails with Jeff, from Spokane to Seattle to Miami, and many great conversations. And today, I think, promises to be another. I'm always excited when Jess has a new book forthcoming. He never disappoints. And his most recent, So Far Gone, is no exception. I'm going to give you a little synopsis of So Far Gone so that you can kind of track today's conversation. Rhys Kinnick has gone off the grid. At Thanksgiving a few years ago, he's a retired journalist. Thanksgiving a few years back, a fed up Rhys punched his conspiracy theorist son in the law, Shane, in the mouth, chucked his smartphone out the car window, and fled for a cabin in the woods with no one around except a pack of hungry raccoons. Now Kinnick's old life is about to land right back on his crumbling doorstep. Can this failed husband and father, a man with no internet and a car that barely runs, reemerge into the broken world to track down his missing daughter and save his sweet, precious grandchildren from the members of a dangerous militia? With the help of his caustic ex-girlfriend, a bipolar retired detective, and his only friend, who appears to be furious with him, Kinnick heads off on a wild journey through cultural lunacy and the rubble of life he thought he'd left behind. The book is hilarious, incisive, ever so timely, and a great addition to the Jess Walter oeuvre or canon. So please welcome this week's fresh face in hell, the great Jess Walter. Jess, thanks for joining us, buddy.
Hi, Johnny. Nice to join you in hell.
How's the knee? You blew your MCL or something, right?
Turns out I tore my left ACL 36 years ago and got 36 years of good basketball out of it. And I tore my right ACL, strained my MCL, and tore up my meniscus. So it's technically what they call a full blowout.
So you're back on the hardwood in like what, 4 to 6? 4 to 6 weeks,
I've been playing pool basketball and Nerf basketball, but this could be my actual retirement. I did film a little retirement video and sent it to my family, but they don't believe me either. So, yeah. But 60-year-old knees were not meant for basketball.
Yeah, no, I can only play on blacktop. I can't even forget it about cement, like pickup game, forget it.
Yeah.
I think people are often surprised to find out that writers are good athletes because so many of us aren't. I am, but Jess is great on the hardwood, by the way. He's legendary.
Yeah. I think some people would argue with that word good. So,
well, active. How about active?
Right.
How, it brings up a question, which is how do art and sports intersect for you? I'm trying to remember if you ever really wrote about sports. I've read all your books. Of course, you talked about the NFL refs in this one, but have you written about sports in your books?
I did write a series of short stories about a rec league basketball team, but it's never appeared in print other than in a couple of magazines, in ESPN, the magazine, and the old Grantland. I don't know if you remember Grantland or not, but so those stories have appeared in literary journals, but I've never published them as a series. I think sports, is another one of those areas of life that I don't know how you ignore it as a writer. One of the things is that I have always been drawn to. I actually have a friend who played basketball at Gonzaga, and
Shan Furch.
Well, Shan is one of them.
No,
not
Shan.
Shan.
No. Yeah, no, he was Montana.
No, this is a guy named Mike Nielsen who played on one of the NCAA finals teams or tournament teams, and he's always been amazed at my acceptance of loss. Like, I really don't mind losing. And for a committed athlete to admit that, someone's got to lose in every game. And I would estimate I've lost probably 60% of the time in the games I've played in 45 years as a basketball player. And I find that to be the most fascinating thing to write about in sports, which is because sports is about aging. It's the first sign of mortality you get. The first time you realize you won't live forever is when you play a kid who's better than you at a sport and you realize, I'm not going to be in the US Open or I'm not going to play in the NBA. And those early glimpses of mortality just keep coming as your body deteriorates, as one thing falls away. And so for me, that's always been the most fascinating part of it. Maybe back to reading Rabbit Run, by John Updike, and having Rabbit, run away from a basketball game and try to escape his whole life. It's always seemed to me connected to our mortality.
That's deep, dude, and I have to say it's really refreshing to hear you say that. I think it's an underrated thing about competitiveness that people don't understand. Competitive doesn't always mean you don't have to be Russell Wilson or Tom Brady. It doesn't mean you have to win. It just means you
No.
like to compete, right? Because the stakes are high and it's so immediate. So I'm always like, I mean, my garage is all about games. We got shuffleboard, we got darts,
Yeah.
we got ping pong, every game. We got a huge croquet course, and I just always want to play. My friends come over and I make them my game slaves. And even
Yeah.
they don't understand. I don't think that I really don't have to win. They don't I would rather lose a 21-19 dramatic
Oh my.
thing than win 21-3, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the
No.
engagement.
Yeah. A long rally or volley in ping pong. I mean, who wants to win on their serve? Who wants to ace out in a ping pong game?
Jim
It's
Lynch.
that is true.
You
Yeah.
know,
He's
he's in a
he's
but you
he's
get
got a
ahead of him
wicked
and he might
serve.
start throwing his paddle around. No, no,
I
there's a
I
guy that wants to win.
I feel like that's a drinking thing, though. That has less to do with competitive sports than what's going on while you're playing. But you are the, bar sport Olympic champion, I think, is what I've heard. So I don't know that
Well,
we've.
that's what they say. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wanna just go on record as saying that I'm in it for the love of the game. I don't
I
have to
appreciate
win. I'm
that.
not one of those
Right.
guys that seeks competitive, advantage unless maybe once in a while I'll crop dust my opponent
Yeah.
in,
In
shuffleboard, so they
darts.
gotta
Oh, in
kinda
shuffleboard.
stand
Yeah,
in my cloud, but that's as far
yeah.
as I'll go. I'm not gonna deflate the pucks or anything like that, or I'm
Yeah,
not gonna
yeah.
kick my ball when no one's looking.
Right.
Thank you for indulging me there. Let's get down to your brilliant new novel, So Far
Oh,
Gone, which I
thanks.
finished furiously last night. I
Oh,
just been
thanks.
so busy. I fucking read the first half in like one sitting, and then it's just like, God, I've got to get the kids off to school. So I
Know the
stayed up late
feeling.
last night finishing it, and such a great ending. But I wanted to
Oh,
start
thanks.
with Rhys Kinnick, people will know who I'm talking about even if they haven't read the book because I'm going to give a pretty good overview of the book in the opening. But God, I love the character of Rhys. I've mentioned this to you before. My dad lived off the grid for years. I
Yeah,
mean, like even more off the grid I mean, he was hauling his feces around in a wheelbarrow and he had a cesspool and
amazing.
a line of marine batteries. And there was some political ideology going on there. And he was very much like Rhys in that he was a very cerebral. He knew some Greek, knew some Latin, always always studying and stuff like that. And so the character just really resonated for me. And also, this is leading to the question, which is that it's an ongoing fantasy of me to drop out and off the grid and just make a go of it. I'm so ready, so many days. And that's why I keep writing these dropout characters myself, like Tim and Tillman and West of
Yeah.
Here, or Cave,
Yes.
is because it is. I gotta say, I mean, do you also fantasize about leaving the modern world behind, or is Reese just a purely fictional conceit?
Um, my idea, my fantasy really is embodied in the moment he throws his cell phone out the car window and watches it bounce into the, into the median. I suppose I have a little bit of the Luddite in me and feel like technology um is a force for sort of a lack of cognition and decrease in seriousness and most of the political problems that I think we face, this fragmentation of American politics and culture, I think is in many ways due to technology. So I think that's where it began for me. I actually lived in the very house that I put Rhys Kinnick in as a kid, for 2 years. We moved in, we had no running water, we had no power. We went to the creek and got water and boiled it to have drinking water. When we finally got water from our well, it was this grayish copper color and tasted like it had been run through a car engine. It was incredibly distasteful, and we had powdered milk that we would and Kool-Aid. We would try to hide the taste in Kool-Aid, and so having lived up there as a kid, you know, I was only 7 or 8, but I knew I was not gonna get good sushi in Springdale, Washington, and so, I think I've always been more of a city person, and so my desire to go off the grid and run away from it all, I think was a little more metaphoric and had to do with my dread over the political situation, this sense that things were falling away from the world that I knew. So I definitely I definitely have a bit of the turn my back on the world, but I know having done it that I would last about 2.5 hours in the woods before I was on my way to a cocktail bar somewhere.
I know I can make it well, I made my garage into a cocktail bar, so
Yeah.
I've solved that problem. I've already, but, like, I know I can make it 10 days because I once got snowed in for 10 days, the family couldn't see me anything. I actually
Wow.
I had a sled. I walked 6 miles round trip with a sled to get 2 cases of beer, and a
Yeah.
couple cans of chili, but mostly the beer, and I had to
Yeah.
walk that sucker up a hill down a mile dirt road in the snow. I think I could make it a couple of months, maybe,
Yeah.
because I would just hide in the work because then I'm
Yeah.
alive, right? Like, when I'm in the work, it's
Yeah.
like I don't even miss the outside world kinda thing.
Well,
Um,
and something about being a novelist is to be a recluse, alone in your thoughts, alone in the sort of obsessive world that Rhys falls into where, he's buying books at yard sales and rummage sales and writing his environmental atlas of the world. There is something of the novelist in, I think, a character like that. And so that was not hard to imagine. And my recluse, finds his way to some friends every once in a while and goes fishing and has a beer at the local tavern. And I mean, I think what begins as a sort of uh a political move to get away from the world is really more personal, and that's kind of the path that the novel takes is discovering, what really Reese has been running from all these years.
yeah, and it's often hard not to read into the author, knowing you as I do. Which is, we've closed some bars down. We've hung out quite a bit, but I know about your journalistic background too. So like I had to wonder how much of this is really Jess. That's why I started with that question. Like, do you, but like I can feel the journalist as a journalist, my understanding is because I haven't read your journalism really, I just know of it. But you were less of a sort of investigative reporter and more of a writer of an exposés, right? Was it always more
No,
about
I was so young when I started as a reporter. I started as a sports reporter. I was an intern. I think if anyone was charting my novels, I would almost say the characters that bear the most external resemblance to me often have the least internal qualities that I share. And so,
that
um,
tracks
you
with me.
yeah, yeah, and so I think, a character like Reese, I know the world and the job so well. I know what he's upset by. I know, and I made Reese an environmental journalist intentionally. It wasn't a beat that I ever covered, but in in his disappointment and my disappointment in the abandonment of science by government, by so many people in the culture. Uh, I wanted that to be personal. I wanted it not just to be and he and m- most of the male characters in the book, I think, are facing a kind of loss of identity. For Reese, the things that he believed in, this empirical world where, you would write a story um, about the tailings pond at a uranium mine, and it would make some difference in the world. All that is gone. His career as a daily newspaper journalist barely exists anymore. And so, alongside his loss of identity, is the thing that he believed gave meaning to his work, which was this environmental side. As a reporter, that wasn't really my experience. I moved from sports to community writing to the night cops reporter and the day cops reporter and the courts reporter, and you're taking these little steps up. And then I found myself covering the standoff at Ruby Ridge, which was sort of the big break, I guess, I had as a reporter. And then I did do some investigative work. Jim Lynch and I, another novelist, there was a shooting at an Air Force base, and we team together to find out the background of the shooter, that he'd been run out of the military. And you know, every reporter shares one quality, and that's that if you ask them when the golden age of journalism was, they will describe the exact moment that they were doing it. And so I think I'm guilty of that sometimes, of romanticizing my job so that I was a sort of superhero with a reporter's notebook, when much of the time I was covering a city council meeting and hoping something interesting happened. But it's definitely a job that I loved. And, you know, it had a real purpose to it. You weren't getting rich, but you were bringing to the world information that you thought would make it a better place. And there's not a journalist I in the world who at their base doesn't believe something like that. And that sense of purpose, I don't find in a lot of other careers. I think it's one of the reasons I think fiction writing also has that quality. I think that's one of the reasons why newspaper writers often make good fiction writers, is that sense of purpose.
Yeah, and what and it's funny because sometimes I can tell when they were a newspaper writer. I never can tell with you. I mean, this is the first kind of glimpse I got into it just because you were dealing with the journalists, but, like, there's other journalists that you can smell the coffee on their breath because they tend to information dump on you, and it's like, somebody did some investigation here, and they don't
Yeah.
wanna leave it out. That's.
Well,
Um,
and I
I'm
think
gonna come back. Oh,
sometimes
go.
the pace of, sometimes the pace of newspaper writing makes its way into fiction. It's the reason a lot of writers, a lot of great mystery and thriller writers often start in journalism, because first of all, they know that world of cops and criminals so well, but also something about the pace. In journalism, you really do have to truncate what you're saying. You have to get there as quickly as you can. And I think my my literary dreams preceded my journalism career. I mean, I wanted to be a novelist since I was 12 or 13. And so I think of it was more for me a kind of detour into journalism that made me a better novelist than switching from this craft to a totally different one.
So, Shane, or Shithead Shane, as he's
Yeah,
affectionately known through part of the novel, which of course is Rhys's son-in-law, who he punches in his face, which is the inciting incident of the novel.
yeah,
Um, Rhys is he's a patriot conspiracy theorist. I think of him as a
Shane
patriot, even
is,
though it's
yeah.
more guised in the Christian guise. But you nailed this guy, Jess. I mean, the conspiracy stuff is hilarious. As I mean, the NFL ref thing killed me. How well reasoned the
Yeah,
argument was, but, like, in its own way, it was very logical. And that's the thing that I think is sometimes so fascinating about conspiracy theories is by their own fallacious logic, they are sort of logical. But then so is Humbert Humbert. Sometimes we're just basing
yeah.
things on a completely fallacious premise. Uh, how far down the conspiracy rabbit hole did you have to go with yourself, to write this stuff? Or do you, like so many folks, do you actually have a relative or a friend that occupies that space?
A little bit of both. I've been covering the radical right wing and conspiracy theorists since 1992, since Ruby Ridge. And so,
And we're gonna go
um,
back specifically and talk about that.
yeah, so the difficult thing for me is, I've been uh, trying to explain to skinheads that I'm not an FBI agent for 33 years. And so I'm very aware of that kind of thinking, and there's a reason that it's moved into the mainstream. There are a couple of big reasons. Right now, a third of Americans believe that the 2020 election was stolen. A third of Americans believe Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States. 20% of Americans believe that the COVID vaccine implanted microchips in their bodies. 20% believe 9/11 was a US inside job. We live in a time when this is not fringe thinking anymore. Conspiracy theorists are part of the mainstream. They're part of the government right now, and so I wanted to look specifically at what I find to be a really troubling angle of that, and that's Christian nationalism. And I wanted to do it in a comic way that sort of exposes its just how fallacious it is, and yet. the draw is the same. What conspiracy theories do is explain why we haven't succeeded. They create a pattern of the world in which someone or something is holding us down. Maybe it's the federal government. Maybe it's a Jewish conspiracy. Maybe it's DEI. Whatever it is, the reason that my life hasn't turned out as the way I want it to is because of these forces amassed against us. And every political party is prone to this kind of thinking. And for Shane, it takes this path through. He's the kind of person who really needs an explanation for things. And when these explanations, the more elaborate they are, the more appealing they are. And I loved that his NFL description of how the Patriots were had to stand up and beat the Seattle Seahawks as a way to, as the first sign of the coming revolution of MAGA or whatever. And it's not far off from conversations I've heard in bars. I mean, nothing makes people more conspiratorial than sports,
Oh,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah, no, it's just so subjective. There's no way to be an objective sports fan. I
Right,
mean, it's
right,
just not in the you're always gonna be subjective. I mean,
right.
I just talked to Jim Lampley about a half hour before I get on you, and we were talking about some of the famously bad decisions and, like, just the problem how boxing's so difficult because it's, like, it's completely subjective in its judging, you know
Oh,
what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
There's no objective score, nobody threw it in the goal or across the. So,
And that and it's always they did this. They decided this guy should win. They decided the Patriots should win the Super Bowl. They decided, on and on. And the they is a really dehumanizing thing that is at the heart of every conspiracy theory. So it was fun writing Shane. I have a friend I grew up with who's now a flat earther. We were like space nuts
oh,
together,
man.
and
I know a lot
um
about him.
yeah, and it's inexplicable to those of us, who, for whom that would make no sense. But, uh, this isn't. I think in 1992, I thought there were these pockets of this kind of thinking, and in places like the Northwest, in places like North Idaho, it's kind of everywhere now. It really has become a huge part of our world, and the fracturing of information. It ties directly to what Rhys used to do, because if there's no trust in the institutions anymore, if you don't trust government, you don't trust medicine after the pandemic, you don't trust the media, where's the information supposed to come from that allows us to have a consensus in which to run a functioning society? Where does that information come from?
Right, it's just everything is horizontal, and, how do you sort out demand? Everybody has a voice now, which sounds, like, democratic and good, but, like, without the gatekeepers, depending on your facility to critically think, it's because it gets rocky.
Yeah,
I
and
wanna
it
talk s
yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to talk specifically about evangelicals. I have quite a bit of experience here, friends, acquaintances, even family. Um Does it seem like and these guys we used to call them Christian fundamentalists, 30 years ago, but now it's evangelicals. Does it seem to you I've seen it, but does it seem to you that there's been a shift, in terms of the ideologies in the past decade or so amongst the evangelicals?
Some, certainly. I mean, one thing I wanted to do was have other characters of faith in the novel, because I don't wanna paint everyone with the same brush. To me, Christian nationalism is especially, fascinating because there's almost nothing Christian about it, you know? It, and I keep wanting to go to these groups that wanna put the 10 commandments in schools and say, "What if we compromise and put the Beatitudes in instead?" The and so to me, that leap, I have a beloved uncle whose family is evangelicals, and there's nothing cruel in their faith and their belief. There's nothing, you know, there's no preaching or teaching that you should be wealthy and that immigrants are to be feared. On the contrary, he's going around creating churches in immigrant communities and welcoming people. And so I think it's important to make the distinction between those things and a religion that is used to a religion that intersects with the mythology of America, and especially the mythology of the West. I mean, we are so conscious of it out here. When the Bundys, the Nevada family that battled the federal government over grazing rights and ended up taking over um, a refuge, a wildlife refuge in Oregon. When they were successful, they would put signs up saying the West was finally won. The West was finally won. And this goes back, centuries to Western expansion and to the myth that the myth of the iconoclastic Westerner, taming the frontier. And so that was the really specific angle of this that I wanted to look at. I'm agnostic at best. And so but I don't really have an argument with people of faith. I have an argument with people of cruelty and of violence and of bigotry, however it approaches itself. And so that was the spell I wanted Shane to have fallen under, and I wanted his root. You probably noticed the novel is written. It's really centers around Rhys Kinnick, but each chapter begins what happened to, and you get another character. What happened to Bethany? What happened to Lucy? What happened to Chuck? And you get a little glimpse of the inside of them. And I knew I was writing towards Shane, and what a challenge that would be, taking him from a character of mockery to someone who I think by the end had more in common with Rhys than either of them would like to admit.
Yeah, well, character growth,
Yeah,
surprise that those are as a reader, that's always so satisfying.
yeah,
The harder the character is to redeem or the more
yeah.
unlikely a union is, the more satisfying it is.
Or not even to redeem, but just to understand. I mean, for me, it was, how am I gonna get inside this character who believes these ridiculous things? And in the end, that's kind of your only job as a novelist, is to leave, what was the old Bush thing? "Leave no child behind." I mean, I think as novelists, we have to leave no character behind.
I agree. You can't forsake them. It's just
No.
not fair to the reader. The
Yeah.
other one, and for me, the change I saw in the evangelicals, and by the way, we had a couple of evangelical, a couple of cavalry ministers on here months ago, but
Mhm.
they actually really surprised me with it. Particularly, one of them was super progressive. I mean, like
Yeah.
he was in support of Roe v. Wade, and I mean, it was kind of, but like I with the people I know that are close to me, I saw a shift in their church's ideology maybe 10, 15 years ago where it really started to become highly politicized, and it wasn't like that before. It was much
Right.
more like their evangelical ethos was more like, "We're gonna go, we're gonna bring the straw of life to people that are drinking ditch water somewhere."
Right. Yeah.
This reaching out, the cross, from the earth to the sky with the arms reaching out. I grew up and my dad was a minister, my grandfather was a minister, but once I saw this church, they started doing anti-masking meetings and, like, it
Yeah.
just became, and I feel like that spread like wildfire, just like the cult grew like wildfire because, like, I'm trying to figure out I think it's socioeconomic, but what do you think was the particular missing thing that allowed
Yeah.
them to recruit so effectively and to sway people's ideologies? Because the people I know that were evangelicals 10 years ago completely changed their tune. They became different people. They were
Yeah.
not they were became very unchristian.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a larger tribalism that we've fallen into, and I really do go back to the information we are getting. And uh, I don't know if you've ever read a novel like um, Philip Roth's shoot, I can't think of the title
The
of it
human
now.
human stain?
No, no, American Pastoral,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
which is a novel about what we used to call the generation gap. The
Mhm.
adults thought one thing, the children wanted to break these institutions, and that gap was a huge socio-cultural thing that divided families, that divided friends. And the one we have now is, I've been calling it the reality gap, because if you watch Fox News or if you watch MSNBC, you get an entirely different, not only
Narrative.
worldview, but set of facts. And it's no wonder we don't see the world the same way. We are just not getting a common understanding of what the world is. So Sometimes as an experiment, I would do nothing but take in far right media just to see what you're being told. And you're being told that that this vaccine is killing people, that then they're demanding that you have it, and they're controlling your bodies, and they're putting microchips inside you so they can track where you're going. If this is the only information you're getting, it's not surprising to me that you have um, this heightened sense of conflict and danger within these groups. And if the pastor of your church is the one telling you these things, or telling you that liberals want to take your kids to school and perform surgeries that change their gender, I mean, if you're getting this bizarre sense of the world, from the sources you trust, from the place you go to reinforce your faith, it's kinda not surprising to me that we've ended up in this with this fractured world.
And nor is it, I mean, it's by design, let's be honest. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just a function of late capitalism and,
No,
wealth inequity.
and there's some real cynicism involved. I mean, just look at we have a supposed populist government in which the president went to Wharton and has been a billionaire much of his life. The vice president went to Yale and worked in finance. This is not the it's one of the great tricks that the devil had, was to get people to vote outside their economic and social interests. And now it's so cynical, it's become such an art that it can be really demoralizing. It certainly demoralizes Rhys, and is one of the things that sends him out into the woods, is this belief that we've somehow turned upside down the rules and expectations of what a society should be.
And what's weird about this is that you can look at it from, because I was going to talk about militias next, and this sort of dovetails into that, is that, AOL, Army of the Lord, as they're
Yeah,
called, your
yeah,
militia in So Far Gone. They're not far off from me philosophically in terms of, like, the system is broken, right? Like, well, first, the word is God. We take that out of the equation for me, but this idea of local, only trusting the local, in a way, that's the only way to fix any of this, is on the
yeah,
village level, is sideways, not top down. It's not gonna
right.
work. It's never gonna work. You can't, this is a big elephant. You can't pass enough legislation fast enough. You can't move it. The only way you're gonna really do it is small. So, like, I can even kind of see, I can see that allure from him. Like, they don't give a shit if the feds come in, but if the county sheriff comes in, they're gonna respect that. Like, I mean, that's how you build it. I think they understand that, and I think it kinda scares me because that's gonna allow them to
Yeah. I mean,
perpetuate faster than the people that are all fractured.
yeah, and you said something that I think is entirely true. If you were to poll Americans today and say, "Are we going in the right direction?" Um, Going back 40 years, 80% will say no, but they're imagining the other direction. They're imagining we're going too far right, we're going too far left, we're going too cruel, we're not cruel enough. And so
I know, where does cruelty come? We're not cruel
Right,
enough.
right, no,
Yeah.
but that there is a sort of cruelty, wing of the right now, and so
And a lot of people are traumatized by their childhoods, and they had
right,
authoritarian parents, and, like, it's like it was, if it worked for me, it's good for the country.
or in the same way that they that their failures are explained by, some cabal of forces. They also, don't want other people to have success. And one of the heartbreaking things was the breakup of unions was partly driven by people's sense of envy and schadenfreude, and I don't want teachers having summers off. I don't have summers off. Why are they, there's a whole human nature is sometimes the villain in these stories, and I think using human nature, um, to 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 make cruelty part of your politics is insane. But specifically with those militias, I really did want Reese to realize that Imagine you have Shane's beliefs. In your world, what happened over 30 years was that the world went crazy. All of a sudden, America wasn't what it used to be. It was a transgender place where, with a black president, with DEI, with all these things that to you are not American. You watch that slow churning into a world you suddenly didn't recognize as the John Wayne world you grew up in. Now look at Rhys. He's someone for whom the world makes no sense anymore. The world as he saw it has been turned on its head, and now he's in many ways done the thing that the right wing always did, which is to move up to the mountains and hide themselves from the world. And that realization for me that Rhys has become the thing that he hates, and that Shane in many ways exhibits many of the same behaviors, is kind of at the base of it, and weirdly gives me a sense of hope. If 80% of the people think the world is headed that the United States is headed in the wrong direction, maybe there's a way to channel some of that unhappiness in a way that that is again rational and is returns to democracy in some way. So it's funny. I came out of the book feeling not hopeful in the short term because things are really pretty miserable, but kind of hopeful in the long term.
And, Reese, it's impossible to not relate to him as an old white guy. I mean, like, good. I'm glad the patriarchy is going away. Don't get me wrong, but it does make things a little uncomfortable at times. You know what I mean? I'm
Yeah,
not saying
sure.
it's a reverse power structure. And, oh my God, reverse racism. It's not that at all. But you do feel like my character Walter Bergen, who is
Yeah,
the train engineer. He's dealing with a lot of the same things as Reese. Like the world has passed him by, and like he's just he's trying to make sense of it. He actually wants to be an ally, but like he's so far over his head, out of his
yeah,
depth that he can't even get there. And it's another reason that I always jibe with your writing is that I think we both have kind of a,
sorry.
the theme of masculinity in crisis is
Yeah,
kind of like it's a
and
big question.
well, and I think for me, it was interesting, especially because, Reese and Chuck is a police officer that a retired cop that, who's been sort of run out of the police department.
Such a great character.
Such
And
a
he's
fun character,
hilarious.
right?
Yeah.
And that actually came about, yeah, this was one of those novels. I don't know if you ever do this, but a lot of times I'll embed myself in research and you know, and I love that part when when I'm exploring new worlds, but sometimes I just empty my pockets and look around my office and say like, what have I got sitting around that I can use in this novel? And I've had 10 or 11 bikes stolen over the years, and I've only had one returned. And it was returned by a cop who told me essentially the story that Chuck tells in this novel, which is he was a homicide. So I had recognized him from my journalism days, and he was a homicide detective, really good source. And if you're a good source to reporters, you often piss off the brass at a police department. So he was a very good source who got in trouble with his bosses, and as punishment, they decided he would spend his last couple years in property crimes. And Spokane is a property crime town. There's a little bit of meth action and some fentanyl. And, if you leave your garage door open, you're probably going to lose something. If you don't have a great lock on your bike, it's going to get stolen. So anyway, that this cop told me the story that I then give to Chuck, which is he was run out and put in property crimes, and he realized that like most police departments, the Spokane cops had become in love with statistics, and so he decided he was going to fuck with them and solve so many crimes that their
I'd love that.
solution rate would be impossible to ever match again. And so he calls me, he says, "Hey, I got your bike," and I said, "You're kidding." I've never had a bike returned. He said, "Yeah, I got it." So he drives up, he tells me this whole story and said, "All I do is go to the pawn shops with crime reports, and if I see matching serial numbers or," and he said a quote that I give to Chuck. He said, "I have contractors hugging me and crying, saying I've never so much as gotten a crescent wrench back, and here you are returning stolen property." And
And he's
anyway,
just doing it to say "fuck you"
right,
too. That's
right.
the great thing.
Yeah, and
Good
on the
things.
way out, they call him like the Joe DiMaggio of assholes, because of this incredible streak of solving crimes. And he's only gotten the solution rate up from like 2 to 4% or some small thing. But anyway, I remember that day I said, "I'm gonna use this in a novel someday," and my cop friend was like, "Do it." And so, but anyway, so Rhys and Chuck very much share that loss of identity. They're very much men who had a job that meant a certain thing, and now they've reached an age, and I think it does have something to do with, shifting culture, but I also just think it has to do with aging, I mean,
Yeah, it's the continuum of life. Sure,
yeah,
I think so.
you reach an age where, words like promise and potential are so far behind you that, and again, we're coming back to the same thing that we talked about with Shane, which is what explains this dissolution I feel. I feel a dissolution in the culture. I feel a dissolution in myself as a human being. I'm not as talented, as successful, as promising as I once was. Well, we can blame this, we can blame that. We can be like I love what this is how Chuck describes the guys in this militia who he holds. Chuck is also kind of a right-wing guy, very much a gun guy, but he hates these militia guys. He calls them the army of the Lord douchebags, fanatics who are always skulking around pride parades and MLK Day marches in Spokane and Coeur d'Alene, and who, during the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter protests, had shown up for unsolicited security guard duty at shopping malls and downtown stores in their "Don't Tread on Me, I Got a Small Dick" pickup trucks and their Kevlar vests over their black t-shirts, their semi-automatic rifles baby Bjorn to their fat guts like the shithead soldier cop wannabes they were, even though none of them had the stones to go and join the actual military or the brains to pass a simple law enforcement test. And I love that Chuck looks on these guys and the solution they've taken to their feeling of inadequacy and dissolution as, the most offensive thing he can imagine.
Yeah, check out you imbued that character with a lot of pathos, by the way.
Yeah, he was fun
Um,
to write.
I found Reese's return to the world super compelling. Obviously, his disequilibrium and disillusion with the wholesale changes that had taken place. It's strange because I think a lot of us feel this disequilibrium since the pandemic. How much, if any, of Reese's I keep saying Rhys. I finally
Yeah,
find
Reese, yeah.
myself to say Reese. Reese's disillusion, and I guess your own too, is a function of being an older white guy in a culture that's accelerating exponentially. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just there comes a time, and we started at the top talking about the athletes. Every athlete has to reckon with
yeah,
this, and they have to reckon with it 20 years before you and I do as novelists, 30 years even, you know? You're looking
sure,
at
yeah,
30 and it's like, dude, you're aged out, your knees are no good anymore. But like, I get to a point where I feel like I don't feel like I'm 57. I feel like I'm 25 and I just got a bunch of shit wrong with me. But like I try to stay I try to stay current with music and cultural affairs and, less so politically, but more
yeah,
culturally, film and literature and yet, at the same time, I feel like whole cultural movements unfolding around me, and I'm just like, "What?" Like, I guess I'm just not privy to 'em because I'm not going out to the clubs. I'm not around the young people, and that's the only way you're gonna
yeah.
really get it. You can sit and try to observe as a cultural critic or a smart person, and look around, and you're gonna end up loopholing people and painting with the same broad strokes as the enemy is.
Yeah, I hope not, because I think you've hit on something there, which I don't so remember when you were young and minute you heard a piece of music, you had this huge shelf in front of you and you could pull out the drawer and say, "Oh, this is not quite um this goes between Screaming Trees and Nine Inch Nails or whatever, you knew exactly where it fit. And then all of a sudden you realize, I don't know where this music fits with that music, with anything else. You certainly lose touch with a kind of instant understanding of the culture. But think of all the wisdom you gain, um, like the personal wisdom, the mistakes you won't make, the things that, and so I would gladly trade, not knowing who this actress is for, what I've learned in the literature that I've read, for instance. I think the big thing is to not lose your sense of curiosity, your sense of wonder, your ability to engage someone new in conversation, even if you don't quite understand it. And so, like, it's the thing I love about writing is I think it keeps me curious and fresh and humble. And, and I have also I've seen the world in a way I wouldn't have expected to as a writer, but I feel like that remains my path to not stultifying and becoming this sort of, this person who shakes off the world in the way that Rhys does. I very much wrote this book in a conscious effort to not disappear into some allegorical state of reclusivity myself, to not go into the woods of my mind and say, well, everything's messed up. I'm going to stop reading the newspaper. And I have to stay engaged with the world because it's the only world there is. And I don't know how much longer I have on it. And as a creature drawn by curiosity and wonder, those are the things that I know keep me younger than these terrible knees and this bad back and this gray hair. It's that sense of wonder and allowing yourself to ask questions of the world.
Amen. I mean, that's for me, I pretty much look at it the same way. I talk
Yeah.
about it as an exercise in empathy. That's why I'm so often writing outside the purview of my own personal experience,
Yeah.
because I wanna accrue that experience and that understanding, and I wanna become a more expansive person, and it's just such a rare opportunity. That's why I encourage everybody to write. I mean, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Publication doesn't have to be the end goal.
Yeah.
You don't have to be William James. You just the exercise of it, just getting out of your own way and giving
Yeah.
yourself to trying to have to achieve this otherness. And, it's a big risk sometimes, like, but I think it always pays dividends. I wanted to talk in broader terms about your life as an artist. Given the quality and consistency and sheer output of your work, I suspect you feel like I do. Like writing fiction is kind of like what you were born to do. Like when did you? Well, you told us this. You realized you were a novelist before journalism. Uh, Tell me about your moment. When did you know that this was like this is your thing? This is
Yeah.
what I was meant to do.
I mean, I guess I loved writing my whole life. When we moved up to that farm and we lived out, uh, our nearest neighbors were a mile away. My grandparents lived 3 miles up the road, and my grandma would give us scratch paper. I tell my kids what scratch paper was, and they're like, "You couldn't even afford paper?" But my it'd have something on one side, and we would use the other side. And as an 8-year-old, I played magazine writer. We had a magazine called Readers Indigestion. It was like Reader's Digest, and I would assign my cousins, "You're the beauty editor, you're the sports editor," and we would staple it together. There's one copy, there are probably 20 issues of Reader's Indigestion, and there's one copy of each because we didn't have any way to, reproduce it. And I would write stories about, which of my uncles got a DUI or something, and so from that moment on, I knew I loved writing, and I think I was 12 or 13 when I started reading novels in such a way that I was like, "Oh my god, this is what I wanna do." We moved next to a drive-in movie theater when I was 12, and so I spent my summers in a tree fort with binoculars, and a speaker that we'd stolen, watching everything from Woody Allen movies to Burt Reynolds movies to and so that kind of storytelling got mixed in there. I'm a blue collar kid, first generation college student. My dad worked at an aluminum plant. And so the path to being a writer was always seemed as impossible to me as being an NBA point guard. And then I became a dad at 19 in college. My college girlfriend got pregnant. And so I chose journalism in a way because I needed to support a family. I applied, uh, I took the GRE and sent my scores to the University of Iowa, and I met with Frank Conroy, the head of the Iowa Writers Program. And there was no way I was gonna be able to afford to go to the Iowa Writers Workshop. And he gave me great advice. He said, "Whatever path you're on, take that path." So I kept writing short stories the whole time I was a journalist and sending them out. At one point, I sent out short stories for 7 years before I got one published. And, I was a finalist for a short story contest, in Story Magazine and won $25, and I took that check after 7 years of
That'll buy
writing.
you a dozen eggs now. I mean,
Yeah, it would. I took that check and I put a thumbtack through it and I said, "Now I'm a professional," and then, there were all the struggles of any writer. I taught, I ghost wrote, I have written movie scripts forever, whatever I had to do to get my kids through college. And it was almost like you look up one day and you've kind of created a career. And I think the beautiful part about it for me is I never once thought that word career when I was doing it. I just thought, what's the next thing I can write? What's the next thing I can do? Um, and if I had to make money, I made money. And if I didn't have to, I wrote short stories for journals that paid me $75, it's just been the most magical way to experience the world, and has landed me in this really fortunate place where enough people want to read what I write that I feel like I'll get to keep doing it for a while.
I think your purity has paid dividends that way. I mean, for me, it
Oh,
was like 7 unpublished
I
novels. I wasn't like,
remember.
number
Yeah.
eight's the charm. I
Yeah.
mean, it's that I think that purity reward. I think after a while, you just limit every other
Yeah.
possibility in your life. You know what I mean?
I was thinking
Uh,
about you. I read there's a great book, that you should read called, The Correspondent by a writer named Virginia Evans, and I thought of you because in the acknowledgments, she said something about people saying, "Congratulations on your first novel," and her saying, "This is my ninth novel," and I think, there are people who don't have that hardship story toward publication. I like mine because I know at some point, there may be fewer people interested or none. Maybe that those reading numbers that keep falling just fall to such a level that no one wants to read books anymore. And I wonder if I'll keep doing it. And I know I will because I did it when no one cared for for 10, 15 years, and I did it with the same joy that I get out of writing sentences now.
I feel like I'm actually facing that possibility right now,
Nah,
Jess. I'll
it's
talk to you off the air. Um,
yeah.
so I'm going to go James Lipton, actor studio, with you
Okay.
on this one. What makes a great story for you?
What makes a great story is, words made into paragraphs. Let's see, what makes a great story? Probably at the base of it is pathos, is some level of emotional connection, you know, and I think a lot of readers start with character because that's where they tend to find that. But sometimes you can get that from the writer themselves, not from some character they created, but from something they're imbuing the work with. And
The
so
voice,
I
that
think
voice, yeah.
yeah, it can be voice, it can be a style of narration. I think it's something that connects with our common humanity. We all know when we finish a book and we have a hangover. We can't even start another book because we've experienced some kind of life that feels so genuine and moving to us. And I think that comes from genuine emotion, from genuine pathos.
Here's one too in the James Lipton realm, which is, how have you changed as a writer over the decades? Like, if I ask myself that question, because you feel like, I mean, I feel like I'm getting better. I'm making better decisions. I'm getting better. I'm getting more proficient, just like I would on the basketball court, just
Yeah,
from repetition and doing it and time spent doing it. But then when I'm really honest with myself, I say, have I lost anything? And the
right.
answer I came up for myself was like, I might have lost a little bit of this sort of on high, hyperbolic waxing in the language in the narratives kind of,
Mhm.
and maybe a little something in the way of quirkiness. I mean, this is I saw it happen to Philip Roth too. Remember when he was
Yeah,
chiefly kind of more of a comic writer, and then later, like, he's talk about something like American Pastoral, it's not a comic novel, and
yeah.
he learned to resist that, and I think in certain ways, I've learned to resist that. What ways do you feel that you have changed, and do you feel you've gotten better overall? Or, I mean,
There's also I think there's something, especially in writing a novel, there's a physical piece that we don't always acknowledge. It is a little bit like running a marathon or playing basketball or something. I mean, it takes a physical toll. And sometimes I do feel like one thing I've lost is the ability to write for 7 hours and then rewrite it the next day. There might be a Mariners game on, or my brother wants to go have a beer or something, and so I do feel sometimes like I've aged in some way that maybe's made me a little less energetic. I don't know if less energetic on the page, but I've always approached the books as if they have a specific need that is that has nothing to do with me, you know? Beautiful Ruins it needed sweep, and it needed passion, and it needed all these things. So Far Gone wanted an edgy kind of propulsive humor. And so the books require things of me that as a writer that change the voice. And so I think I hope I don't know about better or worse. I'm sure I've gotten better in ways that I can measure, but I don't know that the books necessarily will reflect that, because they have their own requirements, if that makes sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense. I don't
Yeah,
know. I'm just like
yeah.
I
It,
just find it an interesting question because it
you know,
allows you to be really honest. Because you just
yeah,
think, I'm getting better," and then I'm like, "What if I'm not?" You know what I
yeah.
mean? There's always that little bit of self-doubt,
I mean,
like,
I think the one thing we never talk about is the story itself. Like, is this a great story? Because you can write the hell out of something, and if it's got some inert quality, or it doesn't have the narrative rise and fall you want, or the characters don't quite rise off the page, it's not so much about. And so I think finding the thing you're writing about is important. One way that I know I've gotten better is in confidence. When I started, my very first novel is called Over Tumbled Graves, and it's a kind of a crime novel, literary crime novel. And that book has 54 chapters, and each chapter is made up of these small sections. And I think of that as scaffolding. Like, this was scaffolding I had to put up to be able to build this building. I needed, and those little sections were the longest amount of time I could write while sustaining belief in myself as a fiction writer. I would just run out of gas and be like, oh my God, I got another section done. Um, 5 books later, The Zero has 3 chapters, and almost no scaffolding. And that belief in my ability to create a fictional world and to venture into it, I think, as an autodidact, as a self-taught writer who didn't doesn't have an MFA and had to create a novelist out of spare parts, and the son of an aluminum worker. I think I had to sort of build that confidence to be able to to write. And I don't know about you, but I never envisioned an old version of myself. And so I turned 60 this year, and I'm like, shouldn't I like start wearing elbow patches and
yeah, I feel ya.
exude a little more wisdom and a little less, youthful, uh, carelessness or
Then
something?
you go out and buy some Chucks and an OC shirt just
Yeah,
to,
right, exactly. Yeah, I was wearing a t-shirt with a chicken smoking a joint. So this might not be my my wise elder stage.
So since we're winding down on our time here, I wanna, let's end with the beginning, which is another James Lipton type question, but where does a novel start with you? And I realize the answer may not always be the same. For me, it's pretty much always character, but sometimes character tied to a conceit. Talk to me how, and like I said, I know you might have several
Yeah.
different stories here, but talk to me, where does a novel start with you? When do you, "I got something here."
I like this James Lipton version of you, by the way.
Yeah. Makes my job easier too. You're
Yeah,
such a
I'll
good
bet.
talker. I could just lob you a few
Uh,
softballs and woo,
it
we've got 56 minutes.
it is different for me every time, and I probably vary genre most and style most than more than some writers do. But I'll tell you when I know I have a novel is when I can hear it, when the sound of the voice and the sentences, um, it's almost a melodic thing for me. And so, you know, in that beginning, imagining Kinnick on his front porch, when I could hear the sort of rhythmic play of those sentences is when I knew I had it. And I think back.
There's so much interiority to it, which is just so tied to who the character is. You know what I
eh,
mean? Like
it's tied to character, but it's also tied to the sort of language and style that you've started the thing out. I think writing short stories for me was a great way to vary tone and pace and all those things. I remember I wrote a short story called "Anything Helps" about a homeless guy named Bit, Wayne Bittinger, and Bit has this sign that and he writes on there, "Anything helps," and sits along the roadside. And the first sentence of that story was, "Bit hates going to cardboard." And there's no way out of that story you're gonna get some lush love story, you know? Um, you're gonna get a very specific thing. And then the beginning of Beautiful Ruins, the dying actress arrived in his village the only way one could come directly, in a boat that motored into the cove and lurched up to the rock jetty. I mean, there's no way you're not gonna get anything but the sort of journey into this cove. And it's not just one sentence, but it's this accumulation of those things that kind of creates a mood for me. And I have a whole bunch of ideas. I have a whole bunch of characters. They don't always turn into completed stories or novels, but there's a moment in the writing, maybe 10, 15, 30 pages in, when all of a sudden I can feel the song coming together and the song fitting on an album and the album having a B-side. And, I can start to picture the whole thing. And that's usually when I get excited otherwise I have 300 stops and starts of stories and novels and things that I'm waiting to go back to and hope that sound clicks in.
That really resonates with me, the music thing, because music, I feel like,
I know
informs my writing.
that's
That
your life. Yeah.
and, like, I mean, even on a prose level, like, I know I'm not known as any kinda great prose stylist because
I
I'm not really
beg
wowing
to
with the
differ.
verbiage, but for me, it's always about having that swing, like, the
Right.
easiest you
Yeah.
can get from one sentence to the other, and the more it fits the situation. My pet
Yeah.
peeve about people eating apples and their thoughts are a smoky churrasquear, I'm like, "Come on, he's eating an
Yeah.
apple."
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Oh, man, I could talk craft with you all day. He is Jess Walter. He is a master of the craft of writing fiction. Please go, check out his most recent of God, what is it? Your 10th book now, I think, ninth or
11th.
10th.
11th.
11th. God dang it. I'm still
10th
one behind you.
10th work of fiction. So, one nonfiction book, 8 novels, and 2 books of short stories. So, yeah.
The book is so far gone. It is hilarious. It is edifying, and it kept me up really late last night finishing it in preparation to this interview. Jess Walter, thank you for being our fresh face in hell, buddy,
Thanks, Johnny.
and happy healing with the knee.
Yeah, thanks. It's, swollen up as we speak.
I appreciate it.